because it gave them even more independence in a decentralized state than they already had. Okay? So it's almost like France and some of their nobles might be watching CNN and realize the deal that the German princes were able to get, and maybe they were going for that too. Okay? France is a little bit different place than the Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire, wickedly decentralized. France, centralized. So maybe this is a means in which they could start asserting a little bit of their independence, and maybe they could cut a deal where they have a little bit more authority than they do. All right? So, this background here is all it's doing is kind of establishing the fact that there is anti-clericalism in France. Now, how does one cultivate anti-clericalism in France? You don't have to cultivate it. What you have to see is that the church is being corrupt and greedy, and they do all that, and they do it really well. Okay? So that's kind of what's going down. There's two things here. One, it mentions that Francis, the king at the time, he was like the king of France at the time that Henry VIII was the king of England. So, like dominant king in France in the early 1500s. And he spent a bunch of money on war because he was fighting with the Habsburg. It's called the Habsburg-Valois Wars. And remember, one of the big prizes was control over Italian states. All right? But it really was like a wealth push more than anything else. All right? Extending your dynastic territory or whatever the hell that is. All right? The other thing is that Francis was into the Renaissance, which means like he stole Da Vinci. You know, he stole the Mona Lisa. He started to decorate his palaces with a whole bunch of art and other adornments. That stuff costs money. Okay? Now keep in mind that if you're trying to fight war and you're trying to beautify France, you're going to need revenue. But we also remember that the new monarchs in France had kind of set this trend where they wouldn't rely on the nobles for said revenue. So they had to come up with alternate means of creating that revenue. And the deal that they made was a partnership with the church, which almost abrogated an early move that they had made where they tried to assert supremacy over the church. Does anybody remember what that thing was called? Anybody at all?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. There was in the early 1430s, there was a move where the French asserted what they call Gallican liberties. It means that the state, the monarch, was asserting control over the Catholic Church. Meaning the church doesn't get to make appointments, the French king does. The French king has jurisdiction over France. Rome needs to butt out. That happened in 1438. Starts with a P. It's called the Pragmatic Sanction of Bourges.
Oh, we didn't talk about that.
We did. We did indeed. Okay, so that's one of them. Here's the move they decided to make. Let's make nice with the church. This is a move that Francis made and said, hey, it's almost like doing the indulgences thing a little bit. Like it's a deal that's cut between some political figures and some religious figures, and this is how it plays out. It's called the Concordat of Bologna, which was basically a make nice with the church. Like, hey, you know, we're really sorry about that pragmatic sanction thing. We'd like to invite you back. We recognize that we're a predominantly Catholic country and that we're both greedy as hell. All right, so let's figure out a way to maybe, I don't know, sell some public offices, and then we can peel off a whole bunch of revenues and then split them amongst each other. Okay? So if you're watching that, all right, and you are French nobles, A, you're upset on one level because the political system in France is such that the king is centralizing authority and kind of leaving them on the sidelines. They don't like that. They want to feel like they're important. Two, the church is now angling and is greedy and is confiscating property and is buying offices that are supposed to be going to those nobles are now going to some of the loyal church subjects, if you will. Okay? So, it says the kings, through church appointments, were invested financially in the perpetuation of the Catholic Church as the state religion. But the appointments rested on financial considerations meant that the benefactors of those appointments would be corrupt and not really attentive to the spiritual needs of the community. And we haven't gotten to the Council of Trent yet, which means you have all those fun-loving things that the church was into, like sale of indulgences, simony, absenteeism, pluralism, and all of those other things. So is it logical, then, that there would be people in France, especially intelligent people, that might find appeal in somebody like John Calvin? Yes. Okay, and that's kind of what went on. It said, nobles are likely to adopt Lutheran and Calvinist teachings for the same reason the German princes did. It's an effort to break the stranglehold of political centralization on one hand and the relationship of the king and the church in France on the other. They want to be decentralized, and they want the church out of their business, but most importantly, they want the church out of their pocketbooks. Everybody follow? All right. So that's what's going on, and because of that, you're starting to see a really, really big movement in France among people that are starting to adopt Calvinism. And in France, they are called Huguenots. That's right, Huguenots. And not only that, but some leading noble families in France had spent time in Calvin's Geneva. I mentioned two women that were really notable. One's name was Jeanne d'Albret, and the other was Margaret d'Angoulême. Okay? One of them is going to be the future mother of the future king of France. Okay? And actually ushers in the most famous of the French royal families, called the Bourbon. Okay? All right, so long story short, here's how we kind of move here. Francis dies and then is replaced by Henry. Okay, don't worry about the names so much, but kind of get this in mind. All right? Henry then presides over the remainder of the Habsburg-Valois Wars. Okay? The Habsburg-Valois Wars come to an end. The Valois lose. All right, they didn't lose any French territory, but the Habsburgs gained a lot of other territory. Remember, they were kind of fighting over the middle. And a lot of that middle ended up going into Habsburg control. So it says in the treaty that was signed that the Habsburgs gained the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Sardinia. The Spanish got access to lands in Italy like the Duchy of Milan, Burgundy, which is called Franche-Comté. All right? And even at one time, Francis was captured during one of the battles and was held for ransom. And remember how excited French peasants got when the king was held for ransom. It's like their pastime almost. Okay? Like for modern France's pastime is being invaded by Germany. Okay? Their earlier pastime was having their kings captured in battle and held for ransom. Okay? So everybody's got to have their things. All right? So, you got a minority of Protestants now that are trying to assert their right to worship in the way that they want to worship, and some of them are noble families. Okay? The French royalty, the Valois kings, Francis and then Henry, are very Catholic. Okay? And are working hard to try to keep those Protestants persecuted, which is why Calvin and the like, a lot of them flee. There's two statutes here that basically explain why, or these are the pieces of legislation, if you will, that symbolize attacks against French Protestantism. One's called the Edict of Fontainebleau, the other is called the Edict of Chateaubriand. Okay? You don't have to know those. I'm just telling you that there is like legislation, edicts, that have been passed down by the king that said, you're not allowed to worship. We are censoring all of your works. We are going to break up your assemblies, etc., etc. And that's why a lot of them end up in like exile in Switzerland. Okay? Now the cool part. And this is kind of how it goes down. Despite that, the French Protestants, whether they're underground, whether they're being persecuted or not, they're getting stronger. Okay? And what we start to notice here is out of this mass, in the 1540s and 50s, emerges three really powerful families. Okay? Actually four. We know that the Valois are powerful because they're the freaking kings of France. Right? But there's also a family in the south and the west called the Bourbons. And they operate in this region called Navarre, but there's a couple of other patches elsewhere. Okay? They are Protestants, and they are powerful, and they are politically kind of uppity. They want, to move up in the ranks of power. All right? And this is what ultimately is going to happen. There becomes kind of a civil war that breaks out. All right? And it's going to happen on the watch of this, the successors of Henry II. I'll get to that in just a second. The other Protestants are closer to the central portion of France, and they're called the Montmorency-Châtillon, or Montmorency-Chatillon.
Yeah.
Okay? And then I told you before, the family that dominates in the east, and these are probably the most influential people to the Valois kings at the moment. They are called the Guise. And the Guise are not only really influential in France, but they're kind of like, they're pushing their weight around in a lot of other jurisdictions, including the Queen of Scotland, who happens to be Mary of Guise. She's the one that marries James V. Okay? All right. Back to the Protestants.
Wait, is Mary of Guise like Mary Queen of Scots?
Yeah,
She named after herself.
of course she did.
Alright, cool.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. All right. But basically it was a power play where the Guise family would literally control France.
So
I'm sorry, not France. Yeah, they wanted that too, but Scotland. Okay.
Mary de Guise, she married who?
Jimmy Stewart. Yeah. She
I
did.
just don't know what that is.
No, I know. Jimmy Stewart's an old American actor. He had a very cool voice. He talked like, he was
Like
in that
Atticus
movie.
Finch.
Yeah, Atticus Finch, exactly.
That's him.
And in the movie with where he wakes up and everybody thought he died.
It doesn't sound like.
Oh my God! It's
It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah.
I love him.
Actually, it is James Stewart, though.
Yeah, that's James Stewart.
Stewart is the ruling dynasty in Scotland,
What?
and the king's name was James.
Okay.
All right, so okay. I'm sorry if my Jimmy Stewart sucked.
Yeah, you should work.
I need to work on that one. Okay, very good.
Christmas
Thanks.
time.
All right. Protestant founders. These are the people that I was referring to before. All right. Huguenot actually comes from a figure by the name of Besançon Hugues. All right. Was part of the whole Geneva thing. All right. And then here are the people that kind of brought Geneva to the western and southern portions of France. And then we know that John Calvin himself was French. All right. Here are some leaders of these French kind of Protestant. They wanted to do schmalkaldic kind of things, where they would start organizing into a military alliance to start to assert their rights to religious freedom. The Bourbons had a leader, his name was Louis Condé, and the Montmorencys had a leader, his name was Gaspard de Coligny. So these are just people that you should know, all right? So here's how it goes, and it's kind of fun. Henry dies. He's the Valois king that presided over the very end of the Habsburg-Valois Wars. It's a great story. Because in celebration of the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis, because France is no longer at war, they said, let's have a celebration. And what that means in the 1500s is, like medieval stuff. A lot of wine or mead or whatever the hell they drink. Some swordsmanship, maybe some archery, and then, of course, the joust, right? Where you got a couple of dudes, on horses with big sticks, and then they try to run each other down. That's what the King of France decided he wanted to do that day. All right? And there was a cat by the name of Nostradamus who had this vision that this French king was going to fall and that there would be some kind of wound that would happen in the side of his temple. And it just so happened that Henry was jousted. The jousting stick went into the side of his head and killed him. And so now Nostradamus is like wicked famous for being a prognosticator.
What happened to the guy who killed him?
They probably killed him, I don't know. I mean, it was an accident, but killing the king is usually not cool no matter how you play. All right. So here's the way that it plays out, and I call them the three inept inbred sons, because that's kind of what they were. The wife of Henry, just so that you know, because there is a little bit of continuity here, is a Medici. Okay, this one is called Catherine, and she's known as the Italian shopkeeper's daughter. That's how she was known, at least in France. So she's the mom, the queen mom, if you will, and she serves as regent for her 3 children. And each of them is going to get a crack at the title. Okay? The first one is Frances, whose wife happens to be a like 9 or 10-year-old girl by the name of Mary, Queen of Scots, obviously influenced heavily by the Guise. And she will be, the Guise are kind of surrounding, you know, if you will, this Francis II. Okay? And it's quite obvious to Catherine de' Medici that the Guise have way too much freaking influence on her kids. And that she's kind of playing the Machiavelli thing a little bit. She starts to relax the restrictions on the Protestants because she sees the Guise as potentially a threat to the Valois line. Like maybe the Guise aren't just going to be loyal advisors, maybe they're going to try to overthrow the monarchy and become the monarchy. So she starts to make nice with the Bourbons and the Montmorency Chatillon. She's trying to play these two sides off on one another, and they're already at war with one another. So it doesn't really matter. Okay? Does everybody kind of follow what's happening? All right. So, Francis, you can notice he lasts from 1559 to 1560. So it's like Mary, like little Mary runs down, gets crowned, husband dies, she leaves and goes back to Scotland. So the next guy up is Charles here. And Charles IX, again, it's like the Guise are kind of like predatory, and they're hanging around with Charles and this sort of thing. And so, you know, there's this move where Catherine de' Medici is kind of watching. And as she had started to like relax the restrictions on the Protestants started to become a little bit more comfortable around the court. And in particular, this guy, Admiral Coligny, became almost like a top advisor, if you will, for Charles IX. He sort of becomes kind of like his mentor, if you will. And now Catherine's like, oh, maybe I screwed up here. Maybe I was too nice to the Montmorency, Chatillon, and Bourbon, and now I'm starting to regret my decision. So then she goes back to the Guise and said, hey, Guise, you know, I think I screwed up by relaxing the restrictions on the Protestants. It turns out that Admiral Coligny is a little bit too heavily influential in our political affairs, and that there's word out that he actually is trying to ally with the Netherlands. And if he does that, we risk a war with Spain. You can read all this, okay, so that if it's not making sense right now, it's in the reading too, okay? But she's trying to like get the Guise kind of on this page where she's like, Admiral Coligny is threatening like the future stability of France. He's way too close to my son. Can you do something about it? And the the Guise family like said, yeah, I think we can hook you up on that. Because she's basically saying, hey, would you like to kill Admiral Coligny and maybe some of the leading Protestants? And the Guise are like, kill Protestants? Yes, where do we sign? So here's the cool part, and I give Catherine de' Medici this mob boss kind of title because this is so like right out of a mafia movie. Right? Here's how this goes down. The children, because it's almost like Capulet Montague kind of stuff, right? There's going to be a marriage, and the marriage is going to feature the daughter of Catherine de' Medici and Henry is going to marry the son of Margaret d'Angoulême, who is Henry of Navarre. So it's like a Catholic will marry a Protestant, and everybody will get together, and there will be the peace, right? So Margot of Valois is going to marry Henry of Navarre, and everybody gets together for this big wedding celebration. Then supposedly what happens is Catherine, while the wedding celebration is going on, is going to give an order. Okay? And she supposedly like hangs out by this like church bell tower or whatever, and she's going to like give the word to the Guise. And the Guise's job was to assassinate Admiral de Coligny. So she kind of like, you know, does the, you know, gives them the sign, and immediately the Guise go on the Coligny, right? But they didn't stop there. Okay? Instead what they did was they ran around France and murdered about 12,000 Protestants. Okay? By the time it was done. All right? So that's one of the things that you read about. It's called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Okay? And it gives you this whole thing here. I guess the number that is here is 20,000. All right? And to make matters worse, I told you before that the person that you're going to read about that's the most psychotic Catholic out there right now, besides the Guise, is King Philip II of Spain, who is the son of Emperor Charles V. Y'all remember Charles V? All right. So his son is the King of Spain. Charles divided the kingdom in half. I told you that. His brother got the Holy Roman Empire and all the German stuff. But his son, Philip, got Spain and the Italian possessions and the New World riches and all of that other stuff. And Philip hated Protestantism. So when he found out that the Guise went around roughshod and murdered 20,000 people, supposedly they had victory celebrations. Not just Philip, but the Pope, of course, as well. Yeah, it's like, oh, that's good. You know, it's good to know that the Pope is like, yeah, we got 20,000 of them, boys. Drinks on me. So that's what happened. Okay, the last thing that you're going to read about is called the War of the Three Henrys. Because what ends up happening at the end of all of this is it's full-on freaking civil war now. All right, remember that Henry of Navarre, who is one of the Henrys, is now married to the Valois line. I mean, they did get married. So he is married to Margot. Okay? So here's how it plays out. The third of the inept inbred sons, his name is Henry III. Okay? There is a Henry who is also the Duke of Guise. And then there's a Henry of Navarre. Those are the three Henrys. And they're all going to be contesting with one another over who eventually is going to become the King of France. And as it turns out, Henry III and Henry of Guise hated each other. So, watch. Henry, fearing Guise factions now supported by Spain, and fearing that Spain might use this as an opportunity for a power play to take out France, okay, emboldened by the fact that the Spanish Armada was defeated by England, meaning Spain was kind of preoccupied, Henry decides he's going to go after Henry, Duke of Guise, and kills him. Okay? So War of Three Henrys is now down to 2 Henrys. Okay? The Guise find out that Henry had Henry, Duke of Guise killed, and what do they do to Henry?
Kill him.
They kill him. Now you're down to 1 Henry. And that Henry's name is Henry of Navarre. He's basically like, last man standing, baby. I'm the king. All right? Here's the problem. Here's a real problem. Henry is a Protestant. Okay? In a predominantly Catholic country. And this is one of the most glorious things that he does. In the middle of this, he recognizes that France as a Protestant state, right smack dab in the middle, right next to Philip II, is bad news. Okay? Because now there's a possibility that France risks war with Spain directly, and Spain would kick the crap out of France. Right? Spain's the most powerful country in continental Europe right now. That's not going to go well. And Henry knows it. So Henry utters the words, Paris is worth a mass. And what that means is that Henry is going to convert to Catholicism in order to save France from potentially going to war with Spain. He's like, that's the ultimate sacrifice. I'm basically changing, not changing gods, but changing interpretations, if you will. Yeah.
So who is Henry Navarre? King Henry de Guise and Henry Valois? Who is Henry Navarre? Where did he come from?
He's the son in the southwestern portion. Navarre is a place in the very southern provinces of France. His name is Bourbon. Okay? And they are a Protestant family that had kind of become really powerful politically, and then he got married to one of the daughters of the Valois line. Okay, so now he's got a very rightful claim to become the King of France. All right, through marriage and the Valois line.
Still married to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you call her that chick?
Yeah.
Yeah, that chick was Margot of Valois.
Alright.
Okay? But now he's recognized as King Henry IV. Okay? So let me just summarize the Henrys for you. Can I? Okay. So we've got Henry, Duke of Guise. Remember? And they literally, I mean, this is like World War I. You guys remember the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance? They had the Protestant League, I'm sorry, the Protestant Union and the Catholic League. Okay? And those that supported the Catholic cause allied themselves with Henry, Duke of Guise. And those that allied with Henry of Navarre and others were basically a Protestant league too. So there's teams that have been chosen here. Only problem is that Henry, Duke of Guise has got Giancarlo Stanton. Okay, and that's Philip II. All right, Philip II, that's a big bat in the lineup. Okay, it's baseball season, give me a break. All right. Okay, back to the story here. The last thing that you need to know is called the Edict of Nantes. Nantes, it's signed in 1598. See? Edict of Nantes. Okay? So if I ask you in April, why does Henry IV of Navarre matter? You're going to say two things. You're going to say Paris is worth a mass, and you're going to say Edict of Nantes. Edict of Nantes is officially ending the French Civil War. Okay? It's a recognition of the Protestant right to worship in France. Okay? He's not backing off and saying, like Elizabeth did, you know, we're a Protestant country. All right? He's saying we're a Catholic country, but we should allow the Huguenots the ability to worship the way that they want to worship. And so that's kind of how he keeps the peace. And for his troubles, about 5 or 6 years later, he's taken out by a Catholic assassin. Okay? But he does begin what's called the Bourbon dynasty. And that's where we get into all the Louis. Alright? So today it's Henry's. Next time we see France, it'll be some Louis. Alright? Okay, so that's the French Civil War. That leaves me 4 minutes to do the Revolt of the Netherlands. Okay. Here's what I'm going to ask you. And then when we get started on Tuesday, I'm going to change my batting order completely. What I'm going to do on Tuesday is I'm going to go over the Revolt of the Netherlands, and I'm going to go over Elizabeth and Philip. And then I'm going to save the 30 Years' War for Wednesday. Does that make sense? Okay. I still want you to do the reading. Okay? I want you to do the reading. But the question I'm going to ask you, and I want answers to this, I want informed answers, is how is this story similar to the American Revolution?
We're talking about religious wars now.
I'm talking about the Revolt of the Netherlands, and I'm talking about Philip II's relationship with the Netherlands. I want you to see how the Netherlands itself looks a hell of a lot like the American colonies did on the eve of the American War for Independence. Okay, you should be able to see a lot. Okay, other than the powdered wigs, they really weren't into that as much. But they were into these really kick-ass kind of triangular beards. If you've ever seen the Dutch. Let me show you a picture here. So you can get this in your head. You got to get into it like a Dutch movement, you know, get into a Dutch groove. Dutch beard style.
It's going to be like 2017.
Oh yeah.
That's badass.
Abraham Lincoln, what you doing?
There we go. That one. That's a baller beard right there. Yep, because they got like the black and they got the little white brim, which I guess is to hide the fact that most people had smallpox. And then you got that really cool kind of.
The beard that borders.